My name is Zachariah. I'm the Events and Partnership Lead here at the Museum of the Order of St John, and I'm going to be doing the talk, Mine's a Pint of Ale, the history of drinking at St John's Gate. And you would be forgiven for, when thinking about Jerusalem Tavern, of only thinking about the glory years of Benjamin Foster in the mid-19th century. I know when I think about the Jerusalem Tavern, I'm fixated on the mid-19th century. But it spans a lot more. It goes from 1760 to 1914. At least that's when a pub was in this building. Some of you may ask, how can you square it existing until 1914 when the order bought it back in 1870? But we will get to that. Also, one small bit of housekeeping. You may know that there's the Jerusalem Tavern over on Britain Street. We won't be talking about that. That's a 1990s recreation of an 18th century coffee house that is no longer called the Jerusalem Tavern because of legal disputes and has no relation to this history. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking about boozing in this area. And to make that bearable, there is some booze. I did think we could have ale for some verisimilitude for when we were drinking in the medieval period. For the Enlightenment, I did want to get some porter, but Waitrose and Clerkenwell doesn't serve porter, so there was none. Right. So we'll start in the medieval period, as every good man should. So the Order of St. John have been here since 1143. And there's a lot of people bustling about in the priory. And religious houses and taverns and brewers sort of go hand in hand. Looking at Charterhouse in the medieval period, they had 4 taverns linked with that religious house. And it does make sense. Like I said, lots of people bustling about, lots of monks. They're not really drinking much water in the medieval period. And also we're here for pilgrims when they're doing long, arduous journeys coming to the city of London. And if I've done a long, arduous journey in the 1300s, I know I'd need a pint. And where are we? Oh, yes. So we can confirm that they brewed a lot in that tavern. It was just over on Jerusalem Passage. Because in one year, they used 225 quarters of oats when brewing. Does anyone know about the brewing process? Does anyone know if that's a lot? I don't. I have no idea. The author who wrote that made it seem like that's quite a lot, so we're going to go with that. And then as we wind through time, Henry VIII comes along. Dissolution of the monasteries in 1540. And all these priory buildings get used for sort of aristocratic housing. But by the 1680s, it's quite unfashionable, not very vogue to live in Farringdon. And they all move west. And briefly, in 1703, Hogarth's father runs a coffee shop out of the East Tower here. You can only speak Latin in that coffee shop, so it doesn't last very long. I was going to talk about that, but I think it's much more fun to talk about hard drinking. So, yes, picture this. We're in the Georgian period. It's bustling industry everywhere. Lots of watchmakers, in particular, print. Lots of print around here. Just in the West Tower over there, Edward Cave and Dr. Samuel Johnson are writing up the Gentleman's Magazine. On St. John Street, just over here, there are 35 different inns, showing the need of all these workers just needing a little tipple after work. And so naturally, 1760 rolls about, and someone has a great idea to use this building, its romantic and chivalric history, and make the Jerusalem Tavern. And by all accounts, it was quite a respectable tavern. Taverns in general were thought of very differently back then. Now we see the pub as a leisure activity, but back then we didn't have cafe society in England until the late 1800s. So you would just go to the pub because it was a place to be, a social place. That is until the gin problems and the temperance movement, which made the middle classes decide that the pub wasn't a very civil or couth place. And that's where the history becomes particularly interesting, because that's when we have the glory days of the Jerusalem Tavern, of Benjamin Foster, the premiership. Now, Benjamin Foster is described thusly. A pleasant and shrewd fellow, a good caterer, well deft at brewing a jorum of punch, could talk with intelligence about literature and antiquities. He loved this place very much when he was the landlord here. He even wrote Ye History of the Priory and the Gate of the Order of St. John. And I think he was a good historian in a Victorian sense. And by that I mean his love to embellish. Also it's said of him that here he hunted up traditions in this place, and where they were thin, he would simply invent them. That's why every Christmas they would feast on a boar's head. There's no record of that before him, but he just thought that's what the medievals would do. He also put all around the pub the coat of arms of different members of the order. So Thomas Dockwra, the man who built this gatehouse in 1504, his coat of arms were around. William Weston, the prior just as the order was dissolved, his arms were here. That man was known to die of a broken heart when the order dissolved, which is very sad. And the best bit of sort of historic finagling that Benjamin Foster did was he just found a knackered old chair and decided that it was Samuel Johnson's chair and would get people to... It was sort of a focal point of the entire pub. And this sort of romantic necessity when drinking is best described or illustrated with the convivial society of the Knights of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. They'd meet here every Monday. They have nothing really to do with the Order of St. John, apart from they really admire the sort of medieval past. They would come here to eat, to drink, and to dance. They even have a song. The song goes, "At St. John's Gate in Clerkenwell, renowned in olden story, where once the ancient knights did dwell, so famed for deeds of glory. True orders here again revived, convivial, free, and easy. From old knights their name derived. Come, and with song we'll please you." And I think that illustrates how really they just enjoyed having a good time. It was mostly a drinking club. So much so that Benjamin Foster refers to them as, and I think this is the best quote ever said about any group in the world, when speaking about the convivial society of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, that their love of glory was exceeded only by their love of grog. And sadly, the Victorian period winds on. I mean, quite happily, I should say, the Order of St. John buy back the gate. The pub is the end of its history, really. Order of St. John buy this premises. They let the pub be sort of run until 1914. They're leasing it out just to sort of raise funds. And one has to wonder what the order thought when the pub did stop in 1914. Other sort of newspapers at the time, Lloyd's News, wrote that another link with the London of the past has been lost. And I thought maybe the order would be sort of sentimental about the disappearing of the pub. They, in fact, weren't. They didn't mention it. They didn't put it in their annual reports, in their journal, or in their chapter minutes. They just did not acknowledge the pub's existence or non-existence. So I think, frankly, they did not give a damn. Which I suppose is a bit of a drab note to end on. If we are to conclude on anything, I suppose it's that you can see the different necessities of drinking in history when looking at this location. The sort of necessity of, literally there are people here and people drink a lot of beer in the medieval period. And then sort of the 18th and 19th century, the necessity to have pomp and romance when drinking, which is a much better way of drinking. And then I suppose the modern 1990s, 18th century interpretation of a coffee house that now is over there, not in the original place and not bearing the original name. One could say that, the object does not reflect the sign, but I'm not a post-structuralist, so I wouldn't say that. That's very boring. But I think our raise a toast. If any of you are present when they are inscribing my tombstone, I ask that you write on it, "Here lies Zachariah Young. His love of glory was only exceeded by his love of grog." Thank you.